I was standing in line at the checkout of our neighborhood grocery store on a bitter December afternoon, clutching my canvas tote against my coat like it could keep me warmer. Outside the wide glass windows, snow whipped sideways across the parking lot. The kind of storm that makes the whole world look erased. At 58, you stop chasing sales across town and start going to the one place close to home where the cashiers know your face and ask about your week. I had been coming here for years. I knew which aisle creaked, which freezer door stuck, which clerk would double bag your milk without asking. Right in front of me at the register stood a tiny elderly woman wrapped in a faded purple shawl. Her back was bent, her white hair thin as silk threads. She emptied a small pile of coins onto the counter from a worn leather wallet and began counting with shaking fingers. On the conveyor belt sat the simplest groceries you could imagine. A loaf of white bread. A carton of milk. 3 potatoes. 1 small onion. "You are short about $1, the cashier said gently. Her name was Madison, a young woman with tired eyes and pink nails. "That cannot be right, sweetheart," the old woman whispered. I counted at home. I counted twice. Someone behind me sighed loudly. The line had grown long. Everyone wanted to get home before the storm got worse. I looked at the old woman's red hands, at the smallness of her purchases, and something tightened inside my chest. How many times had I walked past someone else's struggle pretending not to see it? How many times had I told myself it was not my business? "Ring it up with mine," I said, stepping forward and handing Madison a $20 bill. "I will cover it." "Oh no, honey, you do not have to," the old woman protested softly. "I can put something back." "Please do not," I said with a smile. "It is nothing." She turned to look at me fully then, and I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the snow outside. Her eyes were not cloudy or weak. They were sharp. Clear. Almost luminous. They seemed to look straight through me. "Thank you, daughter," she said quietly. "Kindness always returns. Remember that." I shrugged it off, paid for my own groceries, and gathered my bags. I had chicken for stew, vegetables, bread, canned beans. My husband, Daniel, was leaving that evening for another long trucking run. A week, maybe 10 days. I needed to cook for him and stock up for myself while he was gone. 32 years of marriage. 32 years of packing food into containers, washing his work clothes, waving goodbye from the porch. Life had become a straight line. Predictable. Familiar. Quiet. I was about to leave when I felt a surprisingly strong grip on my coat sleeve. The old woman stood beside me again. "Listen carefully," she whispered, leaning close. "When your husband leaves tonight, do not touch the snow in your yard." I blinked. "What?" "Do not shovel. Not until morning. No matter what he says. Let the snow lie untouched. Promise me." Her fingers tightened, almost painfully. "Your life depends on it." I felt foolish standing there, nodding at what sounded like nonsense. But something in her eyes made me answer. "Okay. I promise." She released me and moved toward the exit with unexpected quickness, disappearing into the swirling white outside. I stood there for a moment longer, shaking my head. Poor thing, I thought. Probably lonely. Maybe not entirely in her right mind. By the time I stepped outside, the wind slapped my face with icy flakes. Daniel and I lived on the edge of town in a quiet suburb where houses sat back on wide lots. The house had belonged to my parents. Solid. Built in the 70s. Thick walls. Sturdy foundation. I had revived the garden years ago. Planted apple trees. Rose bushes along the porch. Peonies by the walkway. That house was my history. My effort. My life. On the bus ride home, packed with damp coats and the smell of wet wool, I remembered Daniel's voice from that morning. The driveway better be cleared by tonight. Those drifts are getting high. And now the old woman's voice echoed in my mind. Do not touch the snow. Coincidence. That was all. When I got home, the house was dark and cold. Daniel had left early to prepare his truck and had not turned up the heat. I set down the groceries, adjusted the thermostat, and moved through the kitchen by habit. Chicken into a pot. Vegetables chopped. Meatloaf from the freezer. Cornbread wrapped in foil. At 6 sharp, the front door slammed open. Daniel stepped in, shaking snow from his jacket onto the floor without looking down. Is everything ready? He asked instead of hello. Yes, I am packing it now. He sat at the table, poured tea, added 3 spoons of sugar, and scrolled through his phone. He did not look at me once. There had been a time when he came home smiling, pulling me into a hug, telling stories from the road. I could not remember exactly when that had stopped. Maybe after my surgery 3 years ago. Maybe long before. Clear the snow tonight, he said without lifting his eyes. I need the driveway open. It is still storming, I started. I said tonight. I pressed my lips together. When are you leaving? In about an hour. 40 minutes later, he came downstairs dressed for the road, duffel bag over his shoulder. I handed him the food. Call when you get there, I said automatically. Yeah. He walked out without kissing me goodbye. The truck engine rumbled, then faded down the street. Silence filled the house. I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the snow piling up outside. The path to the gate was already buried to my knees. Go shovel, a small voice in my head said. Do not touch the snow, another voice answered. I was exhausted. My back ached. The storm was still raging. It would all be covered again by morning anyway. For the first time in years, I chose not to obey. I left the snow untouched. That night I could not sleep. The wind howled against the siding, rattling the windows like someone testing the locks. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, the house creaking around me. Every gust sounded like footsteps. Every shadow felt alive. Do not touch the snow. The old woman's voice would not leave my mind. Around midnight I got up and walked to the bedroom window. The yard was swallowed in darkness. The single lamp by the gate cast a weak yellow glow over the swirling white. The path had completely disappeared. The rose bushes were nothing but rounded mounds. For a moment, I almost put on my coat. Almost grabbed the shovel. Daniel would be furious if he came back and the driveway was blocked. But he was already miles away. And something inside me felt, held back. As if stepping into that snow would mean stepping into something I did not understand. I went back to bed and finally drifted into a restless sleep. I woke before dawn. The storm had stopped. The silence was thick and unnatural, the kind that follows heavy snow. I pulled on my robe and went downstairs, still half asleep, and put the kettle on. When I walked to the kitchen window, I froze. The yard was smooth and untouched, except for one thing. From the gate to the house stretched a line of deep, clear footprints. Large. Heavy. They came straight from the street, through the gate, across the yard, and stopped right beneath the living room windows. Then they continued along the side of the house. Around the back. To every window. My heart began pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. Someone had walked around my house in the middle of the night. While I was alone. While I was sleeping. My hands gripped the windowsill. I forced myself to breathe. The prints were not random. They were deliberate. Slow. Measured. Whoever it was had taken their time. If I had shoveled the driveway the night before, I would never have seen them. The kettle shrieked and I nearly screamed. I shut off the burner and grabbed my phone. I called Officer Marcus Hale. He had worked our area for years. Calm. Inside her living room, we pulled up the footage from around midnight. The grainy black and white video showed my house across the street. Snow falling thick. Street empty. At 11:42 p.m., a dark sedan slowly pulled up. A tall man stepped out. Heavy jacket. Knit cap pulled low. He looked up and down the street, then calmly opened my gate and disappeared inside the yard. I felt my knees weaken. About 10 minutes later, he returned to the car and drove away without hurry. "Pause it there," Hale said, pointing at the screen. The car door had a faint logo on it. Letters barely visible under snow. "Hearth something," he murmured. "Could be Hearthside Realty." "Realty?" I whispered. My mind struggled to keep up. Why would a real estate company be outside my house at midnight? Back in his patrol car, Hale made a few calls. Within an hour, we were sitting in an office downtown at Hearthside Realty. The director, a sharply dressed man in his 40s named Benjamin Cole, greeted us politely until Hale showed his badge. "We have questions about an appraisal done last night at 214 Maple Ridge Drive," Hale said. Cole frowned and opened a file. "Yes. Requested by the homeowner. Daniel Collins." My mouth went dry. There must be a mistake. I own that house. Cole turned the folder toward me. There, printed clearly, was my name. Margaret Collins. And beneath it, a notarized power of attorney authorizing my husband to act on my behalf in selling the property. At the bottom was my signature. I stared at it. It looked like mine. But I had never signed that document. "That is forged," I said, my voice barely steady. Cole shifted uncomfortably. "He brought it in last week. Said you were aware." Hale took the document. "We will need copies of everything. Emails. Contracts. Contact information." The appraisal valued the house at $430,000. The listing had just gone live that morning. There was already a cash buyer. Closing scheduled within days. Days. If I had shoveled the snow, I would not have known anyone came. If I had not seen those footprints, I would not have called anyone. The house could have been sold before I understood what was happening. We left the office in silence. "Why?" I whispered once we were outside. Hale looked at me with something close to sympathy. "Money. Urgency. Maybe debt. We will question him when he returns. Do not warn him." At the station, I filed a report for fraud and forgery. My hands trembled as I wrote my statement. 32 years of marriage reduced to ink on paper. That evening, Daniel texted. "Made it fine. Talk tomorrow." I stared at the message. I did not respond. The next morning, I called a lawyer. I never imagined I would use that word in connection with my own husband. Divorce. It sounded foreign. Impossible. 2 days later, Officer Hale called. We detained him when he came back through town. He confessed. Gambling debts. Significant ones. He planned to sell the house quickly, pay them off, and leave. Leave. Just like that. My chest felt hollow. Not because of the money. Not even because of the betrayal. But because of how quietly he had been preparing to erase me. The charges moved forward. The sale was voided. The forged document sent for handwriting analysis. The notary investigated. Daniel avoided my eyes in court. He looked smaller somehow. He received probation and fines. Restitution. The divorce was finalized within months. He moved out while I stayed with a friend. When I returned, half the closet was empty. The house echoed. For weeks, I wandered from room to room unsure whether to grieve or breathe easier. No slammed doors. No sharp commands. No cold silence at the dinner table. Just quiet. Spring came early that year. Snow melted quickly, revealing damp earth and stubborn green shoots pushing through. I stood at the kitchen window one morning holding coffee, looking at the yard where those footprints had once been. Those tracks had changed everything. And I had almost erased them. If not for a stranger in a grocery store. If not for a whisper about snow. The first weeks after the divorce felt unreal. The house that had once seemed heavy with tension now felt hollow. I would wake up in the middle of the night and listen. No truck engine pulling into the driveway. No boots stomping across the porch. No low voice asking what was for dinner. Just silence. At first the quiet scared me. Then, slowly, it began to feel like space. Space to breathe. Space to think. Space to hear myself again. Neighbors checked on me often. Mrs. Carter brought over banana bread twice in 1 week. The Thompsons invited me for Sunday coffee. Officer Hale stopped by once to update me on paperwork and stayed for tea. "You are handling this better than most," he said one afternoon. I smiled faintly. "I am not sure I have a choice." "You always have a choice," he replied. "Some people stay buried under what happens to them. You did not." That stayed with me. I began thinking about practical things. I was 58. Retirement was years away. Savings would not stretch forever. I did not want to sell the house. It was the last solid piece of my life that still felt true. So I looked for work. The job listings were discouraging. Under 45 preferred. Must be tech savvy. Flexible schedule. Fast-paced environment. I had been a full-time wife for over 3 decades. My resume was a collection of unpaid devotion. Then I saw a small listing in the local paper. Assistant needed at Maple Grove Public Library. Part-time. I applied without much hope. The interview was simple. The director, a warm woman named Diane Foster, asked me why I wanted the job. "Because books kept me company when I felt alone," I answered honestly. "I think they deserve someone who respects that." She smiled. "That is a better answer than most. You can start Monday." The library became my quiet sanctuary. Tall shelves. Dusty sunlight filtering through high windows. The soft hum of the old heating system. I learned the catalog system. Helped children find adventure novels. Guided retirees toward history sections. Repaired torn covers with careful hands. Something inside me began to rebuild. Not loudly. Not dramatically. But steadily. One of the regular visitors, an energetic 70-year-old named Eleanor Brooks, started lingering at the front desk. "You are the one from Maple Ridge, right?" she asked one day. "The one whose husband tried to sell the house." Word travels fast in small communities. "That is me," I said calmly. "Good for you for not letting him get away with it," she said. "I stayed with mine for 25 years after I should have left." Fear does strange things. Her honesty opened a door. Soon she introduced me to her friends. Lucinda. Grace. Marie. All around my age. Widowed. Divorced. Independent in ways I had never allowed myself to be. They invited me out to a retro music night at the community center. Songs from the 70s and 80s filled the hall. I found myself singing along, laughing, remembering a younger version of me who once had dreams that did not revolve around someone else's schedule. Afterward we sat at a small diner drinking coffee and talking about everything from health scares to first loves. "Happiness is not in a man," Lucinda said matter-of-factly. "It is in having a life that is yours." I went home that night and pulled an old photo album from the attic. There I was at 20. Standing in front of the State College building. Hair long and dark. Eyes bright. I had wanted to become an art teacher. I used to sketch for hours. "Do you ever think about that old woman from the store?" she asked. "The one who told you not to shovel." "All the time," I admitted. "I asked around," she continued. "No one remembers seeing her before that day. Not even the cashier." A strange calm settled over me. Maybe she was just passing through. Or maybe she was something else entirely. I thought about how close I had come to clearing that snow. How easily I could have erased the evidence. How quickly my life might have been stolen. "I do not know who she was," I said finally. "But I am grateful. Grateful for footprints. Grateful for truth. Grateful for the courage to see it." Mrs. Carter squeezed my hand. "You did the hard part." After she left, I remained on the porch until the sky turned deep blue and the first stars appeared. 32 years of marriage had ended not with shouting, not with dramatic confessions, but with quiet calculation and forged ink. Yet here I was. Still standing. Still breathing. Still capable of building something new. I realized something important that night. The snow had not been the warning. The snow had been the gift. It preserved what needed to be seen. And for the first time in decades, I felt like my life belonged to me again. One chapter had closed. But I was no longer afraid of the blank page ahead. 2 more parts remain. Summer settled gently over Maple Ridge Drive. The apple trees in my yard, the ones I had planted 20 years ago, were heavy with small green fruit. The roses along the porch bloomed fuller than they had in years, as if they too had been waiting for lighter air. Life no longer felt like something happening to me. It felt like something I was participating in. The court process moved forward quietly in the background. Paperwork. Signatures. Final confirmations. Daniel kept his distance. I heard through neighbors that he was staying with his older brother across town. I did not ask questions. I did not need details. The divorce decree arrived in the mail on a Tuesday afternoon. A plain envelope. Official seal. Final. I sat at the kitchen table holding it for a long time before opening it. 32 years reduced to several typed pages and a stamped signature. I expected to cry. I did not. Instead, I felt something surprising. Relief. Not joy. Not celebration. But release. That evening I walked out into the yard just before sunset. The grass was warm beneath my bare feet. Fireflies flickered along the fence line. I stood where the footprints had once been. Where the snow had preserved the truth. I closed my eyes and let the memory pass through me without resistance. The fear. The shock. The betrayal. And then I let it go. The next morning at the library, Diane handed me a small envelope. "We have had wonderful feedback about you," she said. "The board voted to extend your hours if you are interested." I blinked. "Truly. You are good with people. And you care. That is rare." I accepted without hesitation. The additional hours meant stability. A small raise. A rhythm to my days that felt meaningful. Around that time, Eleanor invited me to join a small volunteer group that read to children at the community center on Saturdays. "You have a calm voice," she insisted. "Kids respond to that." The first time I sat cross-legged in front of a circle of 5-year-olds holding a picture book, I felt something unlock inside me. I had once wanted to be a teacher. Life had taken another path. But here I was. Reading. Guiding. Encouraging. Sometimes life returns dreams in smaller, quieter forms. In July, I did something Daniel would have laughed at. I enrolled in a beginner French class at the community college. Bonjour, I practiced awkwardly in the kitchen one evening, laughing at myself. There was no one to mock my accent. No one to roll their eyes at my enthusiasm. Freedom is often not dramatic. It is simply the absence of dismissal. One afternoon in late summer, Officer Hale stopped by again. "Just checking in," he said, leaning against the porch railing. "How are you holding up?" "Better than I expected," I answered honestly. He nodded thoughtfully. "Hard things can break people. Or they can refine them." We stood there watching the sky shift colors as the sun lowered. "Do you ever think about what might have happened if you had shoveled that night?" he asked quietly. "Every week," I admitted. "And I think I would still be living in a lie." He gave a small smile. "Sometimes truth arrives disguised as inconvenience." After he left, I wrote that sentence down in my notebook. Truth arrives disguised as inconvenience. By early September, the leaves began to change. Gold. Amber. Rust. I hosted my first dinner gathering in years. Not for obligation. Not because someone expected it. But because I wanted to. Eleanor brought a casserole. Lucinda arrived with wine. Grace insisted on dessert. We sat around my dining table laughing so loudly the neighbors probably heard us. At one point, I looked around the room and realized something simple. I was not lonely. I had been lonely in my marriage for years. Alone is not the same as lonely. Autumn deepened. The apple trees produced a generous harvest. I spent an entire weekend making pies, applesauce, and jars of spiced preserves. My kitchen smelled warm and sweet. While sealing the jars, I caught my reflection in the microwave door. There were still gray strands in my hair. Still fine lines around my eyes. But there was something else now. Light. Not youth. Not perfection. Just light. In October, I received a handwritten letter at the library. No return address. Inside was a single sheet of paper. Kindness always returns. No signature. My hands trembled slightly as I read it again. I stepped outside into the crisp fall air, scanning the quiet street. Nothing unusual. Just fallen leaves and distant traffic. Maybe it was coincidence. Maybe someone playing a strange joke. Or maybe the world has ways of reminding us that goodness does not disappear. I folded the note carefully and placed it inside my notebook where I kept my lists and reflections. That winter, when the first snowfall arrived, I stood at the kitchen window again. Snow fell softly, almost gently this time. I felt no fear. No dread. Only awareness. The yard grew white overnight. Smooth. Untouched. In the morning, I stepped outside with a mug of coffee and let the cold air sting my cheeks. This time, there were no footprints. And I smiled. One final part remains. The second winter after everything happened felt different. Snow no longer meant fear. It no longer meant secrets hidden beneath white silence. It felt clean. Honest. I developed a quiet ritual. Whenever fresh snow fell, I would wake early, make coffee, and stand at the kitchen window before anyone else on the street had stepped outside. I would look at the smooth yard and remind myself of that night. Not with pain. With gratitude. Because that snow had protected me. By January, I had settled fully into my new rhythm. 3 days a week at the library. Saturday mornings reading to children. Tuesday and Thursday evenings in my drawing class. Wednesday night French lessons. My calendar was fuller than it had been in decades. One afternoon at the library, a little girl named Harper tugged at my sleeve. "Miss Margaret," she asked, "how do you know which book is the right one?" I knelt beside her. "You try a few pages," I said. "If it feels wrong, you close it. If it feels right, you keep going." She nodded seriously and ran off to the reading corner. I stood there a moment longer, realizing I had just described my own life. Sometimes you think you are deep into the right story. Years pass. Chapters pile up. Then one day you realize, walks through the park. Conversations that felt easy instead of exhausting. I moved carefully. I was not looking to replace one life with another. But I allowed myself openness. Spring arrived again. Crocuses pushed through the soil. Birds returned to the maple trees. One Saturday morning, Thomas joined me at the community center while I read to the children. He sat in the back quietly, smiling as I animated the voices of dragons and princesses. Later, as we walked outside, he said something simple. "You look happiest when you are helping others find something good." I considered that. Maybe he was right. But I also knew something deeper. I looked happiest because I had finally chosen myself. In early April, nearly a year after the divorce was finalized, I hosted another dinner. This time Thomas joined us, along with Eleanor and the rest of the group. Laughter filled the house again, but it sounded different than it once had. It was not strained. It was not careful. It was free. After everyone left, I stood at the sink washing dishes and caught my reflection in the dark window. Behind me, the house glowed warmly. This home had almost been taken from me. Not by strangers. But by someone I trusted. And yet here it stood. Steady. Strong. Like me. Later that night, I pulled out the small notebook where I had written my first list after the divorce. Learn to draw again. Done. Visit the State Museum. Done. Take a weekend trip alone. Done. Plant a new garden bed. Done. Try something new. Done. Below it, I added a new line. Trust myself. Because that had been the real lesson. The old woman in the grocery store had warned me about the snow. But she had also given me something else. Permission to listen to that quiet voice inside me. The one that says pause. The one that says look closer. The one that says something is not right. For years I had silenced that voice in order to keep peace. To avoid conflict. To maintain routine. Now I honored it. Sometimes I still think about her. The way her eyes seemed too sharp for her age. The way her grip on my sleeve felt urgent. I never saw her again. Maybe she was just a passing stranger with intuition. Maybe she was something more. But I know this. Kindness always returns. I paid for her bread and milk. She gave me my life back. If you are listening to this right now, maybe there is something in your own life that feels slightly off. Something you have been brushing aside. Maybe it is not snow in your yard. Maybe it is a conversation you keep avoiding. A feeling you keep dismissing. A truth you are afraid to face. Pause. Look closer. Sometimes the evidence you need is right there in front of you, waiting to be seen. I am 59 now. My garden is growing. My calendar is full. My heart is steady. And when it snows, I smile before I ever reach for a shovel. Because I know that even the coldest night can reveal what needs to be revealed. Thank you for listening to my story. If this touched you in any way, I would love for you to stay connected and hear more stories like this. Your support truly means more than you know. And if you feel like sharing, tell me what city you are listening from and what time it is there right now. I love imagining how far these stories travel. There are 2 more life stories waiting for you next. Choose one and let us keep spending this time together. Much love. See you soon.